All right, just to let you know, this meeting is being recorded, but everybody's microphones, except for Kelly Seaton and I's, have been disengaged, so you can't accidentally interrupt. We do appreciate you all coming in, and since it's still steady rolling in here, we'll give it a couple more minutes before we start for people to join. We will have times for questions, and you can use the chat function at any point if you have a question you want to enter, and we'll address those throughout the presentation at certain times. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and go over some mechanics in a moment. Less logins now. Okay, so thank you for joining the 2023 Recreational Trails Program Grant Workshop. We're going to refer to that as RTP. This is our 23 grant round, and we appreciate you joining. We run this program here at the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation in the Division of Planning and Recreation Resources. I will introduce myself. I'm Crystal McKelvey. I'm the Chief Recreation Grants Manager here in PRR. We oversee multiple grant programs, Land and Water Conservation Fund, American Battlefield Protection Program for Acquisition, and several others. But today our focus is RTP, but want you to know that we're a resource if you have other questions about programs. And I'll pass it off to Kelly to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Kelly Seaton. I'm Recreation Grants Coordinator within DCR Planning and Recreation Resources. So I work with Crystal on most of those grant programs and am very involved in the RTP program. So I'm excited for this year's grant round, and we're excited to see what applications you have, and hopefully we're able to fund a lot of projects.
Thank you. So we'll turn our camera off, and I'm not seeing anyone else's on, just so that you all know. And we'll go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so some more webinar information, mechanics. This is being recorded and transcribed. We will post this to the website afterwards, our Recreational Trails Program website. As I said, you can enter questions into the chat box at any time. We'll stop periodically to respond. And at the end, we will be able to activate microphones if you would prefer to speak up and ask a question, but please hold the out loud questions to the end. There are steps to turn on captions if you'd like. I'll read those out loud for anyone that needs that. You would click on the 3 dots more button at the top, then select language and speech, and then from there, turn on live captions. Hopefully this can help some people if they need it. So our agenda today is an overview about the program and the funding process, eligibility of projects and applicants, administration for those projects that are selected for funding, the reimbursement procedures, and then more information towards the end about this year's application process and guidance regarding that. All right, so an overview of this program. The purpose of the Recreational Trails Program is to provide, expand, and improve upon public recreational trail opportunities for both motorized and non-motorized use. This funding does come through the U.S. Department of Transportation through the Federal Highway Administration. And this is all part of some different acts behind the scenes, but the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is still the source act that provides this funding. This began in 1993, and now in Virginia we have over 340 projects, and we have nearly 30 projects in process right now. This program is a match reimbursement federal grant, so that means that you pay for the project up front and then get reimbursed. As far as our apportionments, get right down to it. Virginia receives an apportionment notice from the Federal Highways Administration, and this year, as consistent over years now, we have $1.4 million available from this fund. The regulations do require us to split that money into different categories. So 30% must be used for non-motorized and motorized projects, and then 40% of the funds can be used for diverse use projects. Excuse me. So therefore, this slide has what's available per category. Diversified, we have 580,000, the 40%, and with the minimum of 25,000 and the variable maximum amounts, but with 250,000 being the maximum for diversified and non-motorized, we therefore estimate that we will be able to approve 3 to 6 grants depending on the requested amount. Motorized is not as heavy in applications most years. And so the maximum is the available 435,000 or down to 25,000 for request. So we can authorize 2 to 4 grants for that, we expect. All right. Yes. Funding basics. So the funding is competitive. We are oversubscribed for this program each year consistently. You can see in 21, we had 35 applications and 9 of those were funded. We use every penny we have. And then in 2022, we received 22 applications and 5 of which were funded. They were for pretty large requested amounts. The payments are made on a reimbursement basis. You do not get the funding upfront. You get the funding after you've shown us and proven what you paid, and then we do the math to process 80% back. You must be able to fund the project while you're going and then get the reimbursements afterwards. So the share and match requirement must be the 20% of the total project cost. So just to walk you through that 80-20, if the grant is $100,000, you must have $25,000 worth of match so that then the combined total project cost is $125,000. Yes. All right. So talking about that 20% for the recreational trails program match, there are multiple options within that, within the regulations that we have walked through in different projects. Cash here is the most straightforward for the accounting process, and the more frequent option that we see from people. Force account labor, if this is agreed upon up front, we must know that you want to use labor expenses, and then you must note that the staff would need to provide work logs accounting for that work done that's specific to the trail project, and also documentation proving those salary rates. We do have many projects that do that. It's possible with proper documentation and letting us know up front. Volunteer labor is certainly an option, and use the current recognized volunteer labor rate, which is currently $30.80 an hour. And we do have to have volunteer logs, signatures accounting for the time they did on that project, and then the calculation of that value. Other grants can be used as match, but both the grant programs have to make sure there's no conflict. So we would need to know that up front, either that you're seeking that additional grant program or that you have had it. And before we can really formalize everything, we need to see that grant agreement to make sure there's no conflicting matters in those. We've used many different grants in projects to help stack each other, and that has included BDOT TAP. That's included HUD in some cases, block grants, and even LWCF in certain circumstances. But please do talk to us first and let us talk it through. Donations can be used towards the 20% share, and of course that's kind of dependent on your project. So we are open to discuss that as well. In-kind labor, materials and equipment, the value of that, if properly documented, can also be matched. And with some limitations, there's a lot of environmental review involved and design cost, depending on where you're at in your project planning. So up to 18 months prior to authorization, those expenses, if they're documented properly, can be used. But again, please do talk with us and let us know what you are thinking upfront. Full disclosure on the application, and we'll walk through it from there. All right. So as far as our schedule for this grant round, we always prepare to open the grant after we find the official apportionment notice from Federal Highways. So that's what leads it, and we opened it. And then May 9th, the applications are due by 4 p.m. We do have to cut that off and cannot accept late applications. They all must be sent to recreationgrants@dcr.virginia.gov. That's our group email address to keep everything sorted and organized. May through June, we're going to take the time to read and score and evaluate every eligible application ourselves and with our advisory committee members. And then by late June, the committee will have met, and then the applicants of projects recommended for funding will be contacted. So expect that to come in late June. We then will coordinate with those project leaders to do site inspections between July and August and prepare those final scopes of work and documents for federal highways requests. And then in September, that's when the project authorizations and grant agreements will come out after Federal Highway does their processing. And it's very important to note, do not begin your construction work, your procurement for construction until these agreements are actually released. In the meantime, if you were not selected, there will be a process of contacting you, and that will be after the work in September, basically to provide feedback and whatnot. Okay, so everything must be authorized before the cutoff for the federal fiscal year, which is September 30th, and that's another part of what drives our schedule here. I'll pass it to Kelly now to talk about more.
Thanks, Crystal. So now to talk a little bit about eligibility, starting with eligible applicants. So the RTP program is allows a pretty wide range of applicants to apply. Local governments, and that includes kind of subsets of local governments. So for instance, your recreation department itself can apply as opposed to the county or town or city. State agencies are eligible, federal government agencies are eligible, tribal governments, and then public recreation government entities. So if these are established park authorities, they're eligible to apply, and nonprofit organizations. So really, most entities are eligible to apply. Private individuals are not eligible. Would be, oops, sorry, changed the slide there. So private entities or any type of for-profit organization are not eligible to apply, but besides that, most organizations are. If you are a nonprofit organization, we do ask, or with the application, it's required to submit a letter of support from the local government entity that covers the area where the project is occurring, and that's for a few reasons. One being the environmental review and permitting and procurement that are required for this program typically follow more closely to what the local government entity already has to follow. So they may be able to give you some support in that aspect. At a minimum, you will probably be reaching out to them for some guidance on that. And we just want to know that they're aware of the project and that they're available to give you, minimal support if needed as you navigate that process. For a lot of our nonprofit applicants, this is where they may run into issues with the procurement and everything being different than what they typically have to use to purchase supplies and services. And now for any of these applicants, if the organization and the applicant is not the landowner, we do require a letter of support from that landowner or other method of showing that you already have a use agreement with them, just something that demonstrates or if you have an easement, anything that demonstrates that you have permission to do this work and to operate the trail on this property. All right, now we'll get into eligible project types. Now this is different than our years past. So any project that's eligible this year was eligible in the past, but this year we are focusing specifically on maintenance and amenities for existing trails. We're doing this for 2023, not to exclude other project types, but because these types of projects specifically have not competed well against new trail construction in recent years. So we wanted to provide an opportunity for these projects to be funded when they're kind of only competing against other maintenance and amenity improvement projects. So that's really the kind of the key to eligibility is if it's an existing trail. And within that, things are a pretty broad range of projects are eligible. And I'll get into that a little more with some examples on the next few slides. But what we're looking at for are maintenance, restoration, rehabilitation of existing trails. And then there can be some new construction if this is you're developing new trailside or trailhead facilities or amenities. So things could be constructed new. It's not purely maintenance or rehab, but they have to support that existing trail and be on that existing trail. Another broad category features that increase access to the trail or make the trail experience more accessible for people with disabilities. So that's one type of project we're looking for. And then assessment of trail conditions for accessibility and maintenance. This is a category within the RTP federal regulations that is allowed. And in Virginia, this is an eligible project type. However, we have to also end up with a constructed element. So this project would have to include some built elements as well. So possibly something along the lines of doing a maintenance assessment and a set amount of maintenance on a section of trail. So if those things go hand in hand, an assessment would be eligible as well. And then for any of the types of projects, the preliminary engineering, which includes any design work and permitting and engineering, the required NEPA environmental review, all those things are eligible as part of the project. And I will go into this a little further with some examples on the next few slides here. So here's just a list, and we don't think this is all inclusive, but to give you some ideas of projects that are eligible. So with trail maintenance, kind of anything that we traditionally think of as maintenance. So improvements to the treadway, whether that's hardening in some way or kind of traditional annual maintenance like brushing or blazing your trails, down and hazard tree removal, that all would be eligible. Improvements to the trail like regrading, paving. So if the trail is currently not paved and you're looking to do that as an improvement or to increase access for people with disabilities, that would be eligible. And then short reroutes, really the idea there with reroutes is that we're not looking to create new trails. With this year's funding, we want to make sure it's kind of a maintenance focus or improvement focus. So reroutes that are done to close a section of trail, whether it was highly eroded or too steep or something. So we would be looking for closure of the former small trail section as well. Improvements to trailhead, so that could be expanding parking, it could be adding a restroom or improving a restroom, adding signage, that all would be eligible this year. And then bridges on an existing trail, whether that's renovating or repairing an existing one or a new bridge construction. Maybe it's an area that had stepping stones and you want to improve that and create a bridge structure, that would be eligible. And then addition of amenities and this can be along the trail or at the trailhead. And I know this list definitely is not all inclusive. So benches, interpretive signage, accessibility features such as tactile models or other wayfinding signage and lighting all would be examples of amenities that would be eligible or we see as being eligible. And then boat launches on existing water trails. So, and I'm going to go to the next slide here. Ineligible project examples. So I'll jump to the second one there. Boat launches on lakes or waters without water trail designation. So because the recreational trails program, the focus is on recreational trails and water trails are in the regulations are allowed for that, but we can't fund boat launches on waters that don't have a water trail designation. So by that, we'd be looking for it being a designated water trail, either in our Virginia Outdoors Plan mapper that's available online and in our application resources, we provide you how to access that. Or if in your local comprehensive plan, it identifies a route as a water trail, it has to be a designated water trail through one of those methods, and we ask for that we may ask for that documentation when you apply, or it has to be very close to you. From this boat launch location, you have to be able to access one of those designated water trails. So perhaps your boat launch is just upstream of an established water trail that's in the Virginia Outdoors Plan, then that is something that we would consider eligible if you would use that to access an established water trail as well. So other ineligible projects, just to clarify, so a new connector between existing trails would not be eligible, or an extension on an existing trail. So we are really looking to do maintenance and amenities on existing trail sections, not creating any new trail or new experiences off of those for this grant round. And then I already just talked about the reroute without closing the former trail, because again, this will be for improving existing trails and not creating new ones. The fourth item there, conversion of any type of corridor or road that's not currently in use as a public trail, because that is a type of project we would consider more in line with a new trail construction. So we want to be able to maintain and add amenities to trails that are currently being used and need these improvements that might not have been able to compete well in our other grant rounds. And then the last item, multi-use facilities. So it's not that indoor facilities are not eligible for the recreational trails program. Generally, we would consider restrooms really the main type of building or facility that would be eligible. But whatever type of facility it is, it has to fully support and kind of only support the trail uses of the site. So anything that also has some features that are useful for, maybe your trail is within a park and it has some maybe a concession stand or anything like that supports other uses besides the trail, would not be eligible. We really need facilities if they are proposed to be just for that trail use and support the recreational trail use of that site and not any other uses. So I'm going to go, I have one more slide and then we'll stop for some questions too. I know that Crystal's been answering some in the chat and some things have come in. So as a final eligibility item here, so this is once you get into the specifics of a project, ineligible costs within that project. These are things that are not eligible for a variety of reasons. So feasibility studies, this kind of goes back to the assessment item that is eligible, but kind of broader feasibility studies are not eligible because ultimately what Federal Highways is looking for in Virginia is something that is built and constructed at the end of it. So with the amount of time we have to do recreational trails program projects and the available funding that we have, we just can't do feasibility studies within those parameters. Second item is food. It doesn't come up often, but it may come up in a situation in which perhaps you were doing a volunteer event or hiring a conservation corps. The program can't reimburse food as a line item or expense. In the case of if you're hiring a conservation corps and they kind of have one set fee for all their services that may trickle down that the food is provided for those participants, that's a little different, and we'd ask you to talk to us about that. That's not necessarily excluded, but as far as specific purchases of food, that's ineligible. Gifts in any way. Most legal fees are not eligible, especially for these types of projects. In past and future years in which land acquisition is eligible for this program, some of those legal fees are, but most legal fees for these maintenance and amenity projects will not be eligible. Any type of payment fee or fee that's an error on the part of the grant recipient or your contractor, or anything like that would not be eligible. And then anything that we don't include in that original scope that you get approved for and we get authorized with Federal Highways, those things are ineligible unless we're able to process a modification, which is always kind of up to the discretion of Federal Highways. So I'm going to stop now and see if we have any questions on eligibility. And I know Crystal's answered some. If you want to repeat any of those
Yeah.
as well, Crystal, go ahead.
Yeah, for the benefit of the group, I will go through these a little bit. So one question was, if we are asking for support for part of a much larger park project that is currently in process, are we eligible? So yes, frequently our trails are part of larger parks and you may already be in a development phase, construction phase there. And the important thing that I'm saying is phase. If you can break apart kind of the trail project from the larger scope and be able to have documentation specific to those expenses, it is likely eligible. But think about kind of the mechanics of that depending on where you are in your project. So the project should not start before September, right? So it does depend. And if you've already started kind of the procurement process, we'll have to verify that documentation and see all that too. Lots of variables, but adding public bathrooms to existing trails during a larger project should be eligible as long as we can really tie those bathrooms to that trail as well. Parking lot okay? Yes, absolutely, especially as part of a trailhead trail access on existing trail. Next question, would fitness stations, I'll kind of let Kelly Seaton think about that for a second, but fitness stations and benches, would they be an acceptable amenity? Benches, absolutely. People do need and deserve to have places to rest along trails. Fitness stations, I've seen different varieties. If it's kind of standalone next to the playground, that might be hard to connect to the trail. But if it's a fitness station, like I've seen that's like along trails, like, every little bit as you go down, there's another thing to get some fitness on, that is likely eligible. So there are some nuances we'll have to discuss with folks, and we encourage you to follow up with us at that Recreation Grants email for further descriptions of your project for us to look more carefully. Um, Piers, are those eligible at the water trail boat launch? I would say if it's a simple pier that is really based on being able to get in and out of the water, um, and view the water, that would be relevant. But a complicated pier with like more of a marina, with lots of different amenities or focused on primarily fishing could be a gray area, but we can discuss that one more. And yes, this meeting will be recorded. Okay, now we have some more. So are canoe kayak launches considered boat launches or just motorized boats? Great question. Both count. A canoe kayak launch would be considered a non-motorized category, and a motorboat would be under the motorized category of funding. So actually, we have been able to assign funds to both types of projects. We do ask that when you consider your canoe kayak launches to make sure they're as accessible as possible. So do consider that. When will the funding be available and when will the local funds need to be available? Another good question. The funding technically is already in a pot of money that we just need federal highways to assign to the projects the committee picks. But you would be able to access the funding if your project is authorized basically October 1st or September 15th. And there's no minimum. We'll talk more about the reimbursements, but when will the local funds need to be available? During the application process, we do want to see your budget, that you have some justification that you can pay for it up front for a while. So, or have a combination of all the eligible matches to also bring it up to the total you're requesting. Ryan clarified they're along the trail. Great. How do we get a designated water trail in the VOP? We're currently writing the Virginia Outdoors Plan. So I would ask that guest to email me for a little bit more information. But there are different water trail designations in the state. And the other thing to consider overall is there a point A and a point B? That's the point of a water trail, is that you can get on the water, you can go a distance, and you can get back out safely to get back to where you started. So do think about that. If you have a water trail that's not yet designated, we can discuss that more with you. Would staff time dedicated to ongoing trail maintenance be an eligible expense? Likely, if talked about upfront in the application, we'd have to kind of get into a little bit of some of the caveats there, but if it's documented, proof of salary, and very specific to that trail, likely to be eligible. One more question for now. Does a memorandum of agreement between a nonprofit and the county's Park and Recreation Department justify our ability to receive this grant, or do we need to go down more of a collaborated site plan for our project? We need to see an agreement. What that looks like between the county and a nonprofit can vary greatly. So we want to know that y'all are collaborating on the same page, and then we'll look at that documentation and let you know if we have any other questions, in short. Okay. One more thing before we move on, I'm just going to go ahead and face it right now with everyone, is that yes, this grant round is different than prior years. It's not focused on general construction. This is because ever since the 2018 VOP, and even prior to that, we in PRR and in the recreation fields have all heard that there's a huge need for maintenance, especially for trails. So we really wanted to focus that, since it's one of the few funds that does have the flexibility to focus on that. And we plan on kind of alternating 1 year maintenance, 1 year construction. But first, we need to see how this goes. We encourage you to apply. We've tried to make it as straightforward as possible. And honestly, we are trying to get an understanding of real results of what maintenance is needed and proceed from there. All right. Thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions, so I'll proceed. All right, so project administration. So all the stars align, you've done the hard work, and we have too, and then we get to a point of your project being authorized, approved, and money assigned. So we're going to go into some details about what happens here. And I just want you to know federal grants may have a little bit of a past knowledge of this is too hard or too much paperwork. It's not always true with proper planning. So here on this slide is kind of the step-by-step of the process. We'll talk about the grant terms in those agreements. We'll talk about the 2 phases. There's a preliminary engineering phase, which is great that this program does fund that. And then within it, you're doing the environmental review. And then you get to move forward to the construction phase. Within all of that, you're doing procurement, and we do have to talk about the federal regulations related. And then you'll be getting your money back, and there's documentation for reimbursements. And then everything goes well, and we are able to close out the project. So we want you to know upfront what to expect upon the case of your project being approved. So here we go. The project kickoff, again, you'll be notified of the results. Once we have a sure understanding of those projects that will move forward, you will also be notified if you were not selected at some point. The DCR staff will then go on site with those applicants and go over the project details in person, make sure it all makes sense, ask any questions we have, and get clarity on anything needed. So then at that meeting and in our discussions, we'll finalize that scope of work statement. That's the paragraph, pretty brief, that we send to Federal Highways explaining what will be accomplished, what's eligible for being reimbursed. DCR will then submit all of that project information to Federal Highways for their review and approval. So again, do not begin any billable work until that agreement is signed. You basically kind of want to put a pause on things, apply, and then see where we go. All right. The grant terms, as I said, are 2 phases: preliminary engineering and construction. The overall project is a 3-year period, so we usually allocate 18 months for your preliminary engineering work, which will involve the environmental review, National Environmental Protection Act required documentation, and acquire the permits needed. Sometimes that does overlap if you're doing a design build, but you do need to, through that environmental review process, confirm which permits do need to be obtained. And then you'll also complete your design plans. It can take less than 18 months. If it's going to take more than that, you'll have to let us know and we can plan accordingly. A little bit of a heads up, usually the NEPA is a categorical exclusion, but we'll talk about that on the next slide. So then you get 18 months for construction. Do not begin construction until Federal Highways has approved your NEPA environmental documentation and we've received notice from you that you have filed the last preliminary engineering reimbursement. So we kind of have a pause moment where we confirm everything's done with PE and then we move into construction documentation with you. So if you are unable to move a construction project, move to construction within 2 years, it can be problematic. Federal Highways will ask questions, and it's possible that we may have to basically withdraw the project and have the funding returned to Federal Highways. Worst case scenario doesn't happen very often whatsoever, but need to tell you up front. Please plan to move forward if you are selected for approval. All right, so to get into the preliminary engineering or PE phase, a little bit more details. We have worked hard, specifically Kelly has worked hard on updating our guidance documentation on our website. We also worked diligently with Federal Highways to get a more concise categorical exclusion form. And so this is a pretty simple way to then summarize the environmental review, and you do need to keep all the attachments and correspondence from those agencies. So the goal is typically to complete a categorical exclusion. If you have a more complicated project or likely impacts to historic or rare species or anything like that, it can move to an environmental assessment or environmental impact statement, but that's uncommon and it all depends on the correspondence you get. Some people run the PE in-house with their staff in the locality or with volunteers even, and some do contract with a consultant for it. You can go either way. So the general process for NEPA is to contact the listed state and federal agencies, give them a good scope of your project details and area of disturbance, save all that correspondence, and then fill out the forms. Now, we will ask you to go ahead to our website after this presentation and go ahead and download those documents for your reference so that you know what you're getting into. If you have a consultant, you can share that with them so they know where they need to be headed for their goals. There is a component of needing public comment, so don't let that sneak up on you. It does take some time to leave that open. A lot of projects don't receive comments or only receive a few, but you do need to compile those comments and be sure to release those and provide the due diligence of allowing the public to comment. So then you will then put all of that together, submit it to us through our email, and then we will submit it to Federal Highways. They are the federal authority on NEPA, so they do need to approve that, sign it, and we'll let you know when they approve it. Then you can go forward with bidding, construction, and on the ground work. It's a lot, but we have made it as straightforward as possible with our documents. Okay. I will say, especially with some of our aquatic projects, do know that some permits are kind of involved. You might need a sediment erosion plan, stormwater permit from DEQ. We've had to run through some floodplain analysis for boat launches, so just consider that in thinking about which project you want to move forward. Okay, so again, I think I covered most of this now, but the bid documents and final reports from engineer will be needed. That engineer does need to be procured correctly if they are working through your PE with you. So on the application, you'll see some questions about environmental. Wherever you're at is fine, but we want to know where you're at in the process. Okay. Let's see. Then once we get to move past the preliminary engineering, the fun begins with construction. Again, we have a process spelled out in the manual about how to close the PE phase, you know, and have the right documentation together for that. And you do need to obtain those permits. That's on the project sponsor, but we do need to see the documentation involved. DCR will review the plans and the bid documents. So you will need to send your draft bid documents to us so that we can just make sure it has the right federal language in there. You're giving full disclosure to those potential bid responders about what they're getting into. That's pretty quick turnaround. We're just scanning it for you. And we'll just keep in communication. All right. There we go. Procurement.
Thanks, Crystal. And we've already alluded to some of these items, but with this grant, if you do accept this grant for the project, any of the work that's within the scope of your RTP grant project has to be, all of the work and all of the billable items has to be procured through the appropriate regulations, both state and federal. Some of those things we do have a guidance document on our website that's called, I think, RT procurement procedures. I forget the front end of it. I think RTP procurement procedures, that outlines all of this in a lot more detail. But the main points are that there's a statement we have there that said that we encourage you to just put that statement straight into your procurement documents or your bid packages, your RFPs, that says partial fundings provided by federal highways, RTP program. There's a few things in there that we ask that you include in any packages to kind of cover those bases of some of those federal requirements. And then one of the main items that is going to, and it'll impact the projects this year differently than ones in the past, is with this federal funding as a federally assisted project, you have to comply with the Buy America requirements, and that traditionally included iron and steel, and that requirement was that the materials have to be iron and steel that's permanently incorporated into a project. So it doesn't count if you're leasing equipment to construct something. This is anything that's in the project. So rebar, anything that gets built in there. There was a question about fitness stations. So if we're installing those structures, that would count. And the previous requirement was for just iron and steel, and those had to be completely manufactured in the US. Now, starting in November of 2022, so this will be our first grant round that has to follow these new regulations, that also includes construction materials, which are guidance document has some links to the federal sites that define construction materials, but the biggest thing I've noted here, kind of the big items that will affect your project. So that now includes aluminum, it includes lumber, it includes plastic, like composite lumbers. So really most of the materials that you would be going into our RTP projects, kind of besides at this point, like surface material like aggregates and asphalt and concrete are not required now. And that's the main one that wouldn't be. And then of course your native soil, but most materials will have to be Buy America compliant now. So definitely factor that in with your estimates for how much your project will cost. You may have to increase that estimate. They state that there's a waiver process, but realistically, we're most likely not able to get any types of waivers for these grant projects. So please assume that you would not be able to get a waiver, and that all iron, steel, and construction materials do need to be fully Buy America compliant. And we even ask a question about this in the application, just to make sure that you have been able to do some planning on that, because it could significantly impact your budget and your timeline, just being able to procure those materials. Another element about RTP that's a little different than maybe your project that you would normally do is there is a requirement to do some outreach to disadvantaged business enterprise and small women and minority owned businesses. There's not a requirement to only use them for goods and services, or but we do have to show some outreach to those businesses and give them the opportunity to compete for any postings that you put out. One last note on general procurement is just that mostly if you follow the Virginia Public Procurement Act standards, that will that will cover you. There's just these few extra things that we outline in that guidance document for federal procurement. One being if you're actually bidding for construction, if it's that type of project, we have to get 2 bids, for example. Otherwise, you have to rebid, and that is something that's happened to us. So even just in the last year, we had to rebid a project. And the last item there, I just wanted to call out that if you are hiring what Federal Highways, their term, qualified youth corps can be non-competitively hired. So you can already be talking and have a corps that you're planning to hire. Now they've given the guidance that if they're listed on the core network website, if they're a member organization of that definitely includes them as qualified. If they're not on that, reach out to us and we can do some more digging. We haven't experienced that yet. They didn't say they'd be ineligible for that non-competitive hiring if they weren't on the website, but it'd kind of be on a case-by-case basis. All right. Now just to talk a little more about reimbursements, and again, Crystal touched on these a little bit. So when it comes time to get the grant funds, as Crystal said, you have to spend the money up front and submit to us for reimbursement. So that means we have to see proof that you've paid that expense. So if it is an invoice, you send us the invoice and proof that the check was cashed. So some recipients send us their bank statement, some send a copy of the front and back of the cleared check, with a stamp on the back to show that it was cashed from their bank account or their bank information. And but so we need those. If you're using one of the different eligible things to show your match, like another grant award or volunteer labor, we need the documentation of that. If it's not just that you're submitting a $10,000 expense and asking for 8,000 back, if you're submitting something that you're wanting to use those other eligible items like volunteer labor for your match, we have a list of documentation we need for that, and we include that all on our website about what we need. We have a reimbursement guide. So when I encourage you to take a look at that stuff. And if you're selected, we have forms and everything to help you submit these reimbursements and kind of get your funds as quickly as possible. In general, I would say it takes probably depending on the time of year and our federal partners and everything, and the state budget cycle that we're in, it can take between 4 and 8 weeks for you to submit a reimbursement request to us and for you to get the funds back. Because the process is that we have to review everything, prepare some forms, kind of submit it through our end. We send the request to Federal Highways. They send the money back to DCR, and DCR sends the money to your organization. So that's why there can be some delay there. But I would say it's usually 4 to 6 weeks. Sometimes it could be as little as 2, but that's not typical. But that's kind of the timeline we're working on. And then for the Buy America requirement, the iron, steel, and construction materials, there's a certification form or a signed statement that you have to make when you submit, just saying that you acknowledge that all these materials are compliant. So we'll ask for that on every reimbursement. You're signing a statement that says that, and we include those with the reimbursement packages. Whoop, sorry, skipping ahead there. I mentioned our website there. I think I can pull it up here. So on our website, if you scroll down, this is where you've hopefully found the application materials under 2023 grant round, and you registered for today's webinar. Down towards the bottom, we have a section called Documents and Forms for Grant Recipients. And that's where this procurement document is. Down at the bottom, Crystal mentioned the environmental review guidance document. And I mentioned about a reimbursement guide. Those documents are all available there. So we would encourage you to take a look at those when you're preparing your application and preparing your and thinking about your schedule and budgets and everything like that for this grant round. All right, and one more note on reimbursement, or a few more notes here on reimbursements. We'll ask you to submit one every 3 months. That's not a really hard deadline. It will depend on your project schedule, but we'll talk about that during project authorization. We do have to maintain a minimal amount of fiscal activity for the project to stay active with federal highways, or there's a risk they could cancel the project or ask for some funds back until you can be active again. We've asked that preliminary engineering phase, we need to know when it's the last reimbursement, because kind of some of the funding's tied to each phase. And like I said, we review those, and Federal Highways reviews them as well. So kind of we might send them on, and they could come back and ask additional questions. So it's rare, but we may reach back out to you after you've already submitted something to us and ask for a little more documentation on something in order to process that payment. And during this process, during your first reimbursement, we will ask for a Virginia W-9 for your organization. And we do ask that recipients register on SAM.gov, the System for Award Management. So we've had a successful RTP project, and you're ready to close out. That project closeout, we want that to happen within the 3-year project period that's authorized. Once all your deliverables are complete and you've submitted all your reimbursement requests, we will conduct a site inspection. You let us know that. We'll conduct a site inspection, and we ask for a short report of your accomplishments. Right now, we don't have a template for that. We may in the future, but we will in your grant agreement outline the things that we ask for in that report. Generally it's a few photos, summary of what you accomplished, and then let us know any of that disadvantaged business enterprise or small women and minority business involvement in the project. So I'll go to one more slide here. Crystal, you want to jump in?
Sure. Thank you, Kelly. So that's been a lot of details, but we do want folks to know what you're getting into when you apply, and let you know that we're here to support you as well. So in summary, these are federal dollars, so it must be completed to those federal standards. Any delays or amendments, we can ask for amendments from the federal highways. So just keep us informed. We do want to provide good client sub-applicant customer service, and keep everybody informed. So then also we can do extensions. These are 3-year project periods, but things come up with weather and budgets and all sorts of things. So don't give up, but let us know, because we do have to let the federal highways know 30 days prior to that expiring. So again, we've had a wide variety of trail projects since the beginning of this program, and we are always excited to see what other projects are on the table. Keep open communication. I dropped our recreation grants at dcr.virginia.gov email address in the chat. And I will say one question came up. So if an organization had a previous project that had to withdraw, does that penalize or disqualify from applying for a different project for funding in the future? The answer is no, it does not disqualify you. At this point, as long as you're not barred from receiving federal funds for some odd reason, I think that is very, very rare. Then you do have an opportunity. There's some fine print about if you have a current project going on in our manual, but no, that should work. I think that was the only question. Kelly's going to now walk through the application process, and we'll stop for questions again after that. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Crystal. So we just wanted to walk through point out some things with the application file itself that will hopefully give you some guidance for how to fill it out as you go along. So the application file itself, so what we would consider a complete application on the website there's a Microsoft Word document that's a fillable document with spaces to enter the text. And then there's also a PDF that's the certification form. And we just separated those from previous grant rounds. We had some issues with, the different types of forms, and the PDF form is the one we need the signature on. So we just separated that out so you can kind of obtain signatures. We can accept electronic signatures, and it's kind of up to you. Who your certifying person is, but we ask that you kind of combine everything when you send it back to us. But we kept them separate so you have some flexibility to kind of change formatting and things in the application itself. So yeah, we ask you to, once you're done, create a PDF of that completed Word document form. And if you're able and you have the software to do so, insert the attachments kind of between the sections where we list them. The instructions are in the application. And if you're not able to do that, it will not, it won't score against you or anything in our evaluations, but it does help us review the applications and have everything in order and kind of keep track of things. There is not a word limit for any of the questions, but we have a limit on the total size of the application. So we say 25 pages max, including your attachments. And we came at this number as a reasonable number that we expect your answers to be concise but thorough. And we ask that you don't reduce the font size any smaller than 10 points. So that hopefully can give you some flexibility to, some questions you may answer longer than the space that's kind of automatically provided in there. Some may go shorter. And the Word document should kind of, as you go, adjust that formatting so that everyone kind of has the opportunity to provide more information in the questions that make sense for their project, and less if they have less for that. Because of our email, accepting the application via email, we ask that your file size is no larger than 25 megabytes. If, after you compile everything and you're not able to reduce it, reach out to us, before the application deadline, and we can discuss using an alternative method for submission. Our agency transitioned into different platforms for all of these things recently, so we may have some other options that weren't available to us. This is what we've used in the past. So again, just reach out if you have any issues, but we're hoping you're able to keep that under 25 megabytes. And if you have any issues with the application form at all, please don't hesitate, reach out to my number will be at the end, and it's in our materials, or email us, and we'll work with you to get you another version of the application, or plain text or anything that you need to be able to fill that out. And the manual that we posted with all the grant round materials does include an appendix that has a few different application resources. I think we'll cover most of them here today, but that can also help you as you go through and prepare your application. All right, that application certification form that I discussed, that PDF form that gets the signature at the bottom, for that, the applicant name, that should be the grant recipient. So the person that would actually be awarded the grant from DCR if you are selected. And then for a contact person, this also does not have to be the same person that is the signatory authority down at the bottom of the sheet. This should be the person that we're reaching out to directly to talk about the project, kind of what we call your project manager for the grant. This is the person that we will, reach out to let them know if you're selected, but we'd also expect you to kind of coordinate staff on your end if we're going to have a site visit, kind of the main contact person for us. But you're welcome to insert other emails as well if you want multiple people notified of your grant award status. Please include those folks in there as well, but just let us know who is that main contact person. And then the kind of geographic numbers, district numbers, FIPS code, tax parcel, those are just all things we need for internal reporting. It's not really factored into any scoring or anything like that. It's just information we need to collect from our applicants. All right, section A. These are all kind of the details of the project. So our scoring review committee can get a good idea of what your project's really about. You're not necessarily scored or evaluated on these things, but this is the section that we'll be able to take away and know what you're planning to do there. The project title, again, this is not something that's a hard rule, but descriptive but not too long is a good kind of a good goal to go for. We have to put these project titles on a lot of the forms, the federal highways and everything. So if they get too long, it becomes a little much for some of the forms and reporting we have to do. So 4 to 8 words is probably a good target there. The project category, those were those categories Crystal discussed at the beginning. So the diversified, the non-motorized, single use, and the motorized. And we say it in the manual as well. If you're not really sure which category your project fits into, then reach out to us. We can help you. And also if you check wrong, we, as we're evaluating, we may change your category if we disagree or think it's a better fit in another category. It won't disqualify you or anything like that. And then the scope box, we ask you to describe what the RTP project will accomplish. That's really just the RTP project. So we're not looking for the full scope if this is part of a larger project or efforts that you're doing on the site or in the park. We want to know what the RTP grant scope will be specifically. And then section A has the most attachments. Again, this is to provide us the background information so we really understand your project. So we ask for a map of the existing trail. And if this does not exist, we will ask you to kind of create a simple map, but it doesn't have to be anything fancy. We just want to have an idea of the layout of the trail and where this location is on it. This is for our information in evaluating it too, as we're trying to look up stuff and understand where your project is, but it's also for our, if you are selected, it'll help us come locate your project if we're going out to see it, or if we happen to be doing another site visit, we may swing by outside of an official site visit as well, just to get an idea of it, kind of outside of the scoring, not as part of the evaluation. We ask for some photos. We put a limit up to 5. You may have to combine those onto less than 5 pages because of that 25 total page limit. It just depends how many other attachments, because some of the attachments are not required or might not apply to you. So we ask for up to 5 photos. Location maps. Again, that's just to help us identify where your project is and will aid us if we are, when it comes time for site visits. And then, as discussed earlier, the proof of the right-of-way. That's if you're not the owner. So again, like a copy of the easement, the agreement, whatever it is that you have that shows that you're allowed to do this work on that property and that you're and that the landowner supports that, whether the landowner is a locality or a private individual. And then if you are a nonprofit applicant, we need that letter of support from the locality in which the project is located. All right, section B, this is where a good chunk of the scoring points come from. There are a lot of questions and sub-questions in section B here. So I would just recommend that you do address each of the points, each of the bullets that are in those questions, because they may correspond to an item that we're looking at when we're evaluating the projects and scoring them. For the question that's specifically about the project increasing or providing access for people with disabilities, we do have some accessibility resources listed at the end of the manual that's posted in Appendix B. So I encourage you to take a look at those when you're planning your project and any other projects that your entity undertakes as well. This section, we do not ask for any attachments. All right, section C, project implementation. For the schedule, we ask you to be very detailed in an area in which I'm not sure specifically if we're evaluating on this year, but we ask for you to explain that there's 2 phases that Crystal talked about. So what are those preliminary engineering tasks, completing your environmental review, completing your design work, what are kind of some milestones in construction? So please do be as detailed as you can be there in that section. For your design and engineering, you don't have to be, you certainly don't have to be completed with that. The grant can fund design and engineering work. We do mostly want to know where you're at is the biggest goal with asking this question. We do ask you to attach those drawings if you have them. We want to know where you're at, but just please help us understand where you are in the process and what still needs to be done. For your budget, we ask for an attachment of your budget, a one-page budget of the project. And then within the application, though, we ask that you kind of explain the estimating process and how you came up with that budget, kind of what factors you used, things like that. And that helps us understand that, combined with all your project information, helps us understand if the costs are reasonable, and if we need to be concerned at all, if the budget might be low, things like that. Just helps us understand the bigger picture. And then the fund source question, that's a kind of, it asks both like how you'll cover the reimbursements, or all the project costs, because you'll have to pay them up front before you get the reimbursement. But then also, this is where you put your information about your matching fund. So what sources are you going to use to cover that match? Is it going to be volunteer labor? Do you have other grant awards? Or are you planning on using cash and paying for everything up front, and with cash and just getting back 80% of everything, as opposed to one of these other match sources? So we will include all that information there. And then this section, just the attachments I already mentioned, the design and construction drawings, whatever level those are at, they can, if you're only at the level of a very basic sketch, then include those. We just want to know where you're at, and they can only help us to understand your project and what you're looking to do here. And the one-page budget, as I mentioned. All right, section D are grant administration. So these are kind of things that Crystal and I, as the administrators of the program, need or to know for the project to move forward. The questions around environmental review, that what we're really looking for is that you do have an understanding of the requirements of this program. Even like is listed on the screen here, even a maintenance-only project has to complete the NEPA level environmental review. I mean, we hope that process will be much simpler with maintenance only on an existing trail. We don't anticipate negative environmental impacts for a project like that, but you still will have to go through the process of contacting the relevant agencies and obtaining comments and compiling our categorical exclusion package. So with this question, we just want to know that you've planned out how it's going to happen, and identify any potential areas of concern ahead of time. And again, that'll all encourage you to look at that environmental review document for what's required. That can help you answer that question. All right, still in the grant administration section of the application. So for procurement, same kind of same type of response as with the environmental review. We're looking to see that you have reviewed the requirements, you're aware of them, you have a good plan for how you will procure all of the things that you'll need to for this project, following the state procedures and following the special federal requirements that are included there, including the Buy America, and then the Build America, Buy America. That's what they're calling the act that includes the construction materials also. So the Buy America was when the previous requirement for just the iron and steel, and that Build America, Buy America is the iron, steel, construction materials. And there's currently a waiver, but manufactured products are also something that's covered nationally with that act. But right now, Federal Highways has a waiver that the manufactured products don't apply to our projects. There is an allowance for just iron and steel. So this doesn't apply to the construction materials. You can have up to $2,500 of non-compliant iron and steel in your project. So if you're looking, this could be for things like bolts, a little bit of rebar or something like those. You can have non-compliant materials if they don't exceed that limit for your total project. So factor that into your budgeting, but that is a hard limit. And then the last question is just about your past grant experience. And this isn't general any grants. We are specifically asking about similar type grants, other recreational trails program grants you've had, land and water conservation fund grants, and then other federal or VDOT, any type of active transportation grants for either multi-use trails or similar type things like that. All right, and then evaluation and scoring. So we did completely revise the scoring criteria this year. So I encourage you to look at that. It is posted with the grant round materials. The applications are all reviewed first by our staff here, just to screen them for eligibility, make sure they're complete. And then as long as they meet those requirements, we send all the applications to our advisory committee who review and score all the applications. And then our committee gets together, they review all their scores, we add up and average the scores for every project, and then select projects for funding from that list. So we're almost finished here with our presentation portion. I'll stop and see if there's any questions on the application process, how evaluation works. I encourage you to put anything in the chat if you have it. And otherwise, we have just a couple more slides and then we'll open up for some spoken questions as well.
Yeah, there's no typed questions at this time. That was very comprehensive. Thank you. I'll go ahead and move forward, and then we'll open up the microphone. So, as I said in the beginning, we in PRR Recreation Grants manage a lot of different things, and we're involved in a lot of different grants. These first two here are not ones that we manage, but we like to promote and work together. So the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation is beginning to ramp up for their 2023 grant round to be announced. Expect it for May or June 2023, perhaps. These fund the protection of open space and parklands that Kelly Seaton and I help advise on, and then lands of historic or cultural significance. DHR helps with that. Farmlands and forests, Department of Forestry and Ag look at those categories, and natural areas, which largely involves the natural heritage team at DCR. Lots of good details about that on their website, and Sue Bulbakaya is the primary contact if you have specific questions about that program. The VDOT Transportation Alternatives Program did recently announce that they'll be holding a webinar soon on April 5th, and that their pre-applications, they have a different process, are due by June 30th. So please do keep an eye out for that. It is much more comprehensive of a lot of different types of projects that localities have to go, are looking to fund, not just trails. So pedestrian bicycle facilities, cultural, historic, and environmental enhancements to transportation infrastructure. They have a great program, so please do reach out to them if you have questions there. So we do recognize there's a lot of grant rounds going on at the same time, quite often. And our other grants that we manage here, Land and Water Conservation Fund is our other primary program. That is money from the National Park Service, and it's a 50-50 match reimbursement program. We had acquisition rounds for a long time, but this past year in 22, we opened it for development projects, and we did receive some trail applications there as well. So since we're in the middle of writing and publishing the Virginia Outdoors Plan by the end of 2023, and that is a big part of the Land and Water Conservation Fund program. We plan to hold the next grant round for that in early 2024, just to get through everything else we have going on. The Trail Access Grant Program you may have heard about, and we have information on our general grants PRR website. This was held in 2021. It was successful in such that we were able to fund 4 local projects that were specifically improving accessibility features on these trails. And that money comes from the personal tax donation. If you're interested in donating on your taxes, it's called the Open Space and Conservation Fund. So we have to wait for that to build up, which can take several years. All right, so that is the overview, and we appreciate all of you that have hung on here to listen to the details. Um, Here on the screen is the email to use. Again, recreation grants with an S at dcr.virginia.gov. Our website is here, recreational planning. So Kelly Seaton's number is on the bottom. Do use that email address just so that we can keep everything organized there. And I thank her for all the hard work she does on this program. We can stop recording soon here, but I'll read the couple questions that have come up. If the project is just paving, do I still have to go through all the steps before construction phase? That is an interesting question, and I think we're gonna have to talk to Federal Highways on some of the NEPA procedures for like already existing, how far do you have to go into this? Though I will say that paving adds impervious surface, so an agency such as DEQ may need to consider some things. I would start with your local planning and, permitting folks if you can, and see what their guidance is as well, because it may be more relevant, and then we can talk more. Yes, thank you, Jennifer. It's called consider contributing part of your refund to the tax checkoff fund when you do your taxes. It is a personal tax option that you can contribute to, and we use it for state parks and this grant program for trail accessibility. And thank you all again so much for attending. We'll end the recording here in a moment and allow you to unmute if you would like to ask questions out